Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins has been rotating in with the ones, did a whole bunch of weird little stuff. But what is Brian Flores actually going to do with that kind of chess piece? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today is Town Hall Tuesday. That means I am answering your questions as presented to me via the Google Doc in the show notes. If you have questions for me, put them in the show notes, and I will get to them next Town Hall Tuesday. Or put them in the Google Doc, which is in the show notes, and I will get to them next Tuesday. Today and this week, I'm on the road. That's why there was no show yesterday. If you were wondering, it was a travel day. I didn't get a chance to squeeze it in, so my apologies for that. But we're back. We're doing the thing. And that also means that I am on a sort of travel setup and at the mercy of the Wi-Fi and wherever I am. So if this, sometimes these will kind of spike the audio or cut out a little bit or something. If that happens, we can all just get through it together. All right, we're gonna be okay. But I do have some questions. And the first one comes from Chris, who asks, out of our edge room, who do you see stepping into that Jihad Ward / Patrick Jones role where they play DT on NASCAR package, or do you see them just rolling with Allen or one of the D tackles just doing that instead? I don't see them dropping the package altogether since it was so effective. Yeah, so NASCAR, for those that don't know, is when they take out the D tackles and replace them with defensive ends. So you would have, this would be very much a third down thing that you would do, or a 2nd and 20 kind of move, where you know that they're going to be passing, so you're going to put in all defensive, Patrick Jones and Dallas Turner on the inside, Grenard and Van Ginkel on the outside, and then you would be able to do all kinds of weird rush stuff. So that won't go away. I don't think that that's a personnel dependent thing. I don't think you have to have so many good edge rushers to justify doing that. I think you just have to have guys that, you'd rather have than your run stuffing D tackle, right? Which I think most teams have, and I think most teams have some version of this. But the answer to this is probably Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. So here's what I'll say about Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. After I haven't really dedicated, I didn't do a Patreon video on him or anything. I haven't really dedicated the time on him that someone that Matt Freese has, which he's done a whole zone coverage thing and a big podcast at Kindred Skulls. He has gone a lot more in depth, but I think we've come to reasonably similar conclusions. Correct me if I'm wrong, that Ingram-Dawkins should be mostly a run player. Not like a big nose run stuffer, put him at, one tech and let him eat a double kind of guy. He's a penetrator for sure, but he's much better at stacking and shedding run blocks than he is at setting up, pass blocks up and around the edge. And really, I don't even need to make that distinction necessarily. Rather, I like him on the inside far more than I like him on the outside. His outside pass rush is pretty rough. There's not a lot of oomph to his hands. He can get bumped off his path really easily. It's kind of slow. He doesn't bend around the corner as tight as you want. It's probably not to an NFL caliber, I would even go as far to say. But that's specifically him pass rushing around the edge, like speed rush up and around, dip the shoulder, that kind of thing. That's just not going to be the move that he makes his living on. Or if it is, it means he got a lot better at it. Rather, I think Ingram-Dawkins belongs on the inside as a sort of that Jihad Ward role. Jihad Ward played on the inside a lot. Excuse me. And he not only on those NASCAR package downs, but he did just kick inside sometimes a lot, especially in 2-minute drills or whatever. And in those situations where you're not as worried about him in the run, but he's big enough where he you wouldn't be caught out if they ran the ball against him, right? If you have Dallas Turner there, that would be disastrous. That's not his game at all. So the way I see this going down, And we'll see, by the first game, we'll have a much closer, or even by camp, joint practices and stuff, we'll have a much closer idea of what this is. But the way I see this going down is that your kind of main five are going to be Harrison Phillips, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, and then Grenard and Van Ginkel on the outside. And you'll rotate in Dallas Turner with those two as much as you want. And then on the inside, on nickel downs, where there's 4 defensive linemen, you'll take Hargrave, I would say, out. He's the one that I think is the least capable of taking on double teams. So when they're in nickel, yeah, nickel's more likely to pass, but it's also people want to get you into your nickel personnel and run against you. So in nickel, I think you want Allen and Phillips to be the 2 guys, and Hargrave can be sort of a just base downs guy. And then when you want to go to that NASCAR package because it's third down or whatever, I think you get Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, Jonathan Grenard, move them around the formation, flip them over and do whatever. And then I think that's what Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins is primarily for. And if he ever does rotate it on base downs, because everybody rotates in a little bit, I think he's playing like that 4 tech, that sort of Jerry Tillery role, the Dean Lowry Memorial role, you know what I mean? And like spelling Javon Hargrave there, or maybe even just backing him up if he gets hurt or whatever. That's what I think the distribution is. And then you work in your Taki Taimanis and your Jalen Redmonds or whoever as you see fit. Next question comes from Ari, who asks, if the Vikings were to acquire a third player named JJ, would it be Super Bowl? Well, it's already Super Bowl, my friend. So that is a by default yes answer. I'm sure there's some JJs that people can look up that would be great additions that they could somehow find out, right? Or somebody like Juwan James or whatever, or Juwan Jennings, the San Francisco receiver, that could work. But, it's already Super Bowl, so balls to the wall. Johannes asks, we can all agree that the Vikings have a really good team this year, but the real question mark is the QB. How good has JJ McCarthy have to be this season? Oh, wow. Okay. I think what you're asking is how good does JJ McCarthy have to be this season so the Vikings could have a realistic chance to win a Super Bowl? I think a punctuation got missed there or something. So I got a little tripped up. But yeah, at least top Stafford level, or is someone like Hurts good enough? And you've said Stafford like a top 7 or Hurts like a top 12, which is going to get you in trouble. I won't endorse any QB ranking. That's not how I like to do things. But to answer your question, I think the level you think of like Hurts, so if you think of like that top 12 guy, that good, not great, I think if JJ McCarthy is above average, this team has a chance to go very far. I think they're built where above average quarterbacking can turn into 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns. Like I think halfway decent quarterbacking can make for an elite Vikings team because of the way the team is constructed. And we kind of saw that last year, right? It would probably be too harsh on Sam Darnold to call him okay the way he played last year. I think he played better than okay last year. But I do think that like he drove that bus more than he gets credit for. And I remember last time I was maybe just reminded because it was last time I sat and podcasted in this room was right after the Seattle game. And I remember thinking like, man, like that was Darnold's game. Like Darnold drove the Vikings to victory that game and did things that like clearly 100% squarely were on his shoulders that were like directly causal to winning that game. But, there were games like the Jags game. There were times like, the last couple games of the year where he fell apart and stuff. So there was that inconsistency that we were all kind of waiting for. So I would say if there's another question here that I'm kind of getting into that comes from Look Braun, who says, I know we talk about JJ McCarthy a ton, but in terms of actually projecting the level, how much should we really put into the stories that JJ last year was challenging Darnold? With context, Darnold led the Vikings to a 14-3 season. Is it too homer to expect Sam Darnold level play? So like style is super different, which you acknowledge elsewhere in the length of the question, but I think these sort of mix to put together, like, I think if he's better than just fine, like if JJ McCarthy is above average, this is definitely a team that can contend. Then you've got an above average quarterback with elite weapons, a good O-line, at least it's projected to be the Brian Flores defense and all that. Like it's really hard unless you say that the corners are going to cost them every game, which I don't love that room, but I'm not going to go that far. That'd be crazy. then it's pretty difficult to imagine the thing that's going to sink them if it's not JJ McCarthy himself. It's like, if he can just sort of drive this bus the speed limit, it's going to be fine. And I think that they'll have, every chance to be in every game. Herman the Worm asks, will the new kickoff affect the importance of the kick return job? And if so, do the undrafted running backs have a chance to beat Ty Chandler? So I don't know if those two guys have any kick return experience or who they are, but I think what you're asking more so is like if the kick return job isn't what gets Ty Chandler the job. But the new kick return rules, the change has moved the touchback out so far that I think touchbacks are going to be kind of an untenable option. Last year, because it's a funky new kickoff, teams were like pretty reticent to kick it deep and like force those, or to kick returnable kicks. And then like, you don't want to be the team that everyone figures out how to return kicks against, right? And so they, in a risk averse way, they kicked it deep and took the touchback. And now that's been more discouraged. So teams are going to be forced to take those risks and figure out how to cover them. So as any like meta football thing goes, it's impossible. That's where we were for the kickoff return until it gets figured out and it becomes too easy. And then everyone does it. And then that thing gets solved. And you either go back to impossible or it gets solved just enough to contain it and it becomes, an even Steven thing that some teams are good at and some teams aren't good at. We are waiting for that moment where someone cracks the code of this kick return and teams get really, really, really good at it. Now that we're going to see returns at volume, it's much more likely that someone cracks that code soon. And in a more concrete sense, if they're returning more kicks, it's going to be really important who your kick returner is. Does that mean that Ty Chandler won't win the job? It's possible, because Ty Chandler as a kick returner, I mean, I don't think he's the fastest guy on the team. You could give that to Isaiah Rodgers. You could give it to Jalen Naylor. You could give it to a bunch of people that, if you're just looking for, find a crease and hit the gas kind of speed, or shiftiness or whatever, you could give it to Rondale Moore if he's around. There's some other undrafted guys that are in for the punt return job, and you're probably going to have him in on the kick return job too. So I don't think Chandler is guaranteed the kick return job, but it is going to be important. If Ty Chandler is like a bad running back but gets the kick return job, he's getting the roster spot. To answer the second part of your question, the undrafted free agents, do they have a chance to beat Ty Chandler? Absolutely. Ty Chandler has been fine. He's running back 3. I don't think he is at all in an unassailable position. And if an undrafted rookie has a crazy preseason, like a Mike Boone, or Rock Thomas kind of like explosion, I think it absolutely could make a case. And you're not attached to the 6th round pick who's entering his 4th year. You're not going to be attached to that guy. I've got a whole bunch more questions, some weird trade stuff, and your hot takes, which you can also give me in the Google form, which is in the show notes. I will get to those next here on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets. At Gametime right now, you can find tickets to any Vikings game, including the international games, which has been kind of a pain for people to get their hands on. So if you're looking for some kind of secondary market tickets, let Gametime troll the market for you, find the deals. You can get like really good seats for under $500 right now on Gametime. I just looked at it on the app. So check out Gametime right now, and you can get some really, really, really good deals. They have like their flash deals. Sometimes they'll find like the best deal on the market and they'll highlight it red. It's so hard to miss. There's a panoramic view so you can see your seat, you can see your view, you can make sure you're satisfied with everything. And there's no hidden fees. Everything is upfront with Gametime, and everything is right there for you from the outset. So there are no surprises. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Right now, if you go to Gametime, the Gametime app, download it, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, you can get $20 off of your first purchase. Once again, that is Gametime. Moving right along here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. More questions on the Town Hall Tuesday episode. of Locked On Vikings. Toy Boat. You can't get me. Says, if the Vikings had an offer on the table right now, trading 2 first-round picks for Sauce, would you advise them to take it? 2 first-round picks is a lot. That's probably too much. If Sauce were on the table, I would very much want them to start calling and asking, but I would probably come out with a counteroffer that's a little more reasonable there. I think a first-rounder for Sauce is probably appropriate, but before I would really lock in an answer, I want to watch the tape of Sauce from last year, because everybody in Jets world, including John Butchko, and who does Locked On Jets, there was a little bit more consternation about Sauce. He wasn't really given the Patrick Surtain, I will defend him at all costs. Like if you go to a Broncos fan and you're like, hey, I think Patrick Surtain is mid, like you'll get like a breathless defense, and he like means that much to them. You wouldn't really get that at Sauce, like about Sauce anymore, I feel like, with Jets people. And that's not evidence, but it is a flag that I should probably go in and reevaluate if I really still think that he's like the best corner. But assuming that that's all nothing and he's still like the Sauce Gardner that we're familiar with, I would probably still be willing to give 1 first, but maybe not 2 for Sauce Gardner. But I mean, that's a good player, good age and all that. So I would definitely like pretty harshly counteroffer there, but I wouldn't hang up the phone for sure. 1991 Ford Tempo enthusiast says, should backup center have been a bigger offseason priority? Kelly has lots of age and injury concerns. The only guy behind him is Juergens, who was awful last preseason, who the team has tried to move to a different position. Is there anyone else in the O-line room who could feasibly switch over to play center if we need it? Great question. So this is what I thought Dan Feeney was kind of in the room for last year, and he never had to see the field, which was lucky. Right now, the only other like listed center is Zeke Correll. I think Juergens playing guard, I don't know. Last we heard about it was before spring, before the draft, and in a question about Blake Brandel. Somebody asked if Blake Brandel's going to be the starter next year, and Kevin O'Connell, it was like as a follow-up. Do you remember after the playoff game, coming off of 9 sacks in Arizona again in the wild card against the Rams? And somebody asked him, like, so do you have to improve the O-line, the interior O-line? And he's like, yeah, obviously. And then he like followed that up. Somebody was like, hey, did you like mean that meant that like changes were coming? And he said, he something kind of cagey, but he said, yeah, I mean, we're trying a lot of things. We've got Blake Brandel. We're going to try Walter Rouse. We're going to try Michael Juergens. And that was what it was. From Star Tribune reporting of camp last year, they were really high on Juergens after camp. And so while I hated what I saw in the preseason from him, I thought it was dreadful. They may have seen a lot in like camp and joint practices and stuff that they're maybe putting more stock into. So they might still be pretty high on him. Obviously, we'll see how all that plays out. But if they feel about him the way I feel about him, yeah, what they did at center kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, because the only other feasible option would be Zeke Correll, who's an undrafted rookie, or moving somebody who's never played center before. I don't know if either of those things make me feel very good, right? Which sort of like deduction kind of has to make you think, well, then, okay, I guess they must like Michael Juergens a little better than that then. But this may be a thing of like, I might be the only person talking about Michael Juergens like in depth in his like preseason performance from last year. I don't think anybody else is really mentioning it. Is probably just going with, oh, I guess he's the backup center, and taking it as a given. And so I guess don't take my film evaluation as like gospel there. That might just be me being like wrong about the guy. I don't know. I don't think I'm wrong. Like it seemed pretty obvious to me, but I don't know. Maybe they're just way more into him and there was something I missed. Next one comes from Anonymous, who asks, it seems like many of the best players in the NFL, like Justin Jefferson, were at one point high floor, low ceiling prospects. Can ceiling truly be measured in a predictive way, or are most people just referring to a prospect's relative athletic score? Yeah, they're probably just referring to relative athletic score. I think so. Yeah, floor and ceiling are a thing that have like bugged me, and I use it too. So I'm like super definitely guilty of this as well. But like, when you talk about a player's floor, you're oftentimes not talking about the worst case scenario. You're talking about the way the player, like when we talk about like a draft prospect, right? Because with free agents, the range is a lot smaller. We already know more about them, which is part of why you pay them money, because they're a known quantity and you're getting something that you can like expect. But when you talk about draft prospects and you talk about their floor, usually that means this is who the player is right now. But that's not always the floor. Some guys play great in college and then don't play well in the NFL. And I'm not talking about like that there was a stat that was fake, or that there was some, that they were at a small school and we just shouldn't have trusted. It's like, no, there are guys that'll like go be superstars for like Ohio freaking State and then just like not translate to the NFL and play worse than what we saw in college. That's the floor. The floor is for every rookie. Everyone, all the way from Cam Ward down to Mr. Irrelevant, everyone, and all the undrafted rookies, everyone's floor is that this guy doesn't translate and he sucks. Nobody is immune to a Lewisine style. You never see the field and you're off the team in 3 years, no matter how highly you were drafted. It can happen to everybody, even your favorite, even the guy next year that's the most blue chip guy that's going to be a Hall of Famer, because we always talk about that in the draft. That guy can bust out too. It's always possible. The NFL is different. The speed of the game is different. The lifestyle is different, and some people don't take to it. And sometimes there's stuff about a guy that you don't know until it's way, way, way after the fact. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that there's stuff behind the scenes sometimes that will hold a player back, that will ruin their career, that you just can't know about or put into your evaluation. And if it made you wrong, it kind of isn't your fault. Like, that happens. And in terms of ceiling, yeah, I think a lot of times people are just talking about relative athletic score. They're just talking about like, testing numbers. If they're a good athlete, if they have high numbers, they must have a high ceiling. They must, have potential, right? Athleticism equals potential to a lot of people. To me, when I think of a ceiling, I think of the ideal version of this player. And I'm talking about a player that I've like watched, that I've like really, paid attention to. And I say, what is the ideal version of this player? What, if I were to be the biggest perfectionist, what do I look at about this player, tell him to change, and then when he changes it, he's perfect? Then what kind of player is that? And if you do that with all the draft prospects and line up all of those like platonic ideals next to each other, that's when you can start having ceiling discourse. That's a very interesting, that becomes a very interesting conversation that I wish we had more. I'm trying to think of guys that I had last year that were like, what was that? Like, okay, Gray Zabel, right? He's a very raw potential guy, high athlete. But when I looked at the kind of player that was, his platonic ideal, where I didn't like his footwork. Let's say he fixes his footwork. I didn't like how he uses his hands. Let's say he fixes his hand. And then I see like a nice, strong guard. Okay, now I get it. That's the potential. That's the ceiling, is that you have this like nice, really super, you could tell that he was really athletic. He tested great too. You have this like great zone guard. Okay, that's the platonic ideal of a player. So that really good zone guard. And then I compare it to Tyler Booker, who, what's his, ceiling? And I see a really good mauling power player that can pull, that can, get into those down blocks on like counter runs or power runs and something like that. And I see this kind of this package, and that like, big, strong, burly, move a guy kind of dude that you can just line up, every 4th and 1 is a freebie because you can just line up and run behind him, is I think a rarer commodity nowadays than like a good zone guard. And so I like Tyler Booker better in terms of ceiling. I just thought that ceiling was better. Even though Tyler Booker didn't test as well, he wasn't as much of an athlete, I think the platonic ideal of Tyler Booker was a better player than the platonic ideal of Gray Zabel. That was just like a part of my draft analysis. That's what I think of with ceiling. If you fix everything, what does a guy look like? But yeah, I think most people are just talking about relative athletic score. Can it truly be measured in a predictive way? I think absolutely not. Nothing can be measured in a predictive way in the draft. Okay, one last one from asks, if humans could suspend a single standard droplet of the sun in a vacuum, how close could someone get to it without serious injury? So I looked this up, and so humans could get within like a few million miles of the sun without, with current technology that we have available, we can get theoretically somebody within a few million miles of the sun before they start to burn up. That's with like ablation technology and like thermal, like heat, like heat sinks and stuff like that. I think just like as the day we were born, probably way, way, way less. But if you had a standard droplet of the sun, either you would have to shrink the whole sun down to the size of a droplet, which would create a black hole. It would be so dense, it would just become a singularity and create a black hole. It would collapse in on itself. But I think you just mean like if we just took like a scoop of the sun, which is also, I think if you just took a scoop of the sun, it would stop working, because the whole point of the sun is that the way the sun generates heat, I'm not going to give you a science lesson here, but it is reliant on the large size of the sun creating a bunch of pressure in the middle and like squeezing stuff together, and that makes reactions happen that are very hot. That's the worst fusion explanation you've ever heard. So in a sci-fi world where both of those things weren't problems, and you could just take a droplet of sun temperature material and have it on Earth, it would immediately make the entire Earth uninhabitable. And then, and only then, would the Vikings win the Super Bowl. Next up, I have a few of your hot takes. So we're going to get a little spicy coming up. Moving right along with the Locked On Vikings podcast, we've got some spicy takes. A lot of JJ McCarthy spicy takes today. In fact, it's exclusively one about JJ McCarthy and also, I guess, one about hot dogs. So that's cool. The first one comes from Warlock Fireball Riz Dragon. All right. Says, JJ McCarthy does not have a deep accuracy issue. He has a deep ball sample size and reps issue at Michigan. The deep ball was never the focus at Michigan. He had one offseason with an NFL, and in the only game we got to see with an NFL surrounding cast, I assume you mean, because of the preseason. The only game we got to see was money on all of his deep touch passes. Okay. So I think you're wrong here, but I get the hot take that, his deep ball is actually good. He just didn't throw it a lot. And the assumption that many people made with JJ McCarthy coming out of Michigan, which was that they didn't throw deep a lot, therefore he can't throw deep. They must not like it. They must be preventing it, is wrong. That's the hot take. Okay. I respect the hot take. So here's why it's wrong. I love it. Please submit your wrong opinions to me, everyone. His deep ball. So if you just removed everything else that Michigan did and you just cut up all the deep passes and watched them all in a row, you would see an accuracy issue. He missed a lot. Now, if you want to say that was because he didn't have chemistry with his receivers or whatever, that's a decent, it sounds like cope a little bit to me, but it's at least a reasonable counter theory that if he was able to throw deep balls to those guys more, if they did it more in practice or whatever, he would have been better at it. My theory is that he did struggle at it because of hitches in his giddy up, problems with his throwing motion that cause small inaccuracies, just a little bit of imprecision that doesn't matter on a 10-yard, bullet pass over the middle, on an over the ball route. It doesn't matter on, out routes or anything that was in the kind of intermediate. But when you start to arc the ball up rather than zip the ball through, you would get these problems would expand. They would be exacerbated by the extra distance just because of angles, right? It's why it's easier to get the ball in the hole on a putt than on a drive, right? Because you have to be a lot more accurate on a drive. You have to be super, super, super perfect. There's a much bigger margin of error that than when you're close up. It's just because angles, right? And then he got to this off season and he got better. I think he just got a little better at it because they worked on his throwing motion. They changed the stuff in his throwing motion that I thought was the problem, and then the thing got better. So I feel like it just confirmed that I was right. And I was right and you were wrong. Na boo boo. Vikings guy says, before JJ McCarthy's rookie contract is over, you will go to a Vikings training camp and I get to talk to you in person. I probably will not go to a Vikings training camp. This is a very personal, it's just not worth, it's a lot for me to get to book the travel and to set things up and to take time off of other projects that I'm working on that have nothing to do with football. I have to take time out of those. And it's an expensive thing to do for me. And it wasn't really worth it without, credentialing. And I also don't really have any intention to try to get credentialed or anything. So probably not. I am only here to visit family right now, and it's a much shorter trip than like doing all of camp. However, if you see me at a game, and I will be at a couple this year, if you see me at a game, don't be weird, but say hi. I'll be probably with my dad and my wife. But don't be afraid. Come say hey, shake my hand, be cool. It's fine. So maybe Vikings guy, we can chit chat if you catch me. But I'm not gonna tell you where I am. Okay, it's a game. You gotta find me. Cam X Storm says JJ McCarthy will have the most rushing yards of any second-year QB, and he will be in the top 3 QB rushers in the NFL. Rookie QB with a decent offensive line, and rookie in quotes, rookie QB with a decent offensive line and teams gearing up to stop the pass catchers will lead to lots of easy yards when JJ rolls out of the pocket. So you could be right here. Like, it could happen. I mean, okay, top 3 in the NFL is a lot, right? Because you still have like Lamar Jackson's in this league, and probably starter Daniel Jones. I feel like he's gonna still want to run a lot, but especially if there's an offense that's designed for both him and Anthony Richardson, I think there has to be a lot of QB running in that offense because those both guys are both runners. But I think in spirit you're onto something here, but it would probably be bad if JJ McCarthy is running a lot. That means he's like started to use his legs as a crutch. But this is not Christian Ponder. It was not how he did things at Michigan. He would run when there was space. He would make the decision when it was there to make. You know, if there's a free first down in front of him, you just take it the easy way. But he wouldn't panic into running. That's what you don't want to see. He wouldn't like drop eyes in panic. I would say Jaden Daniels does that a little bit sometimes, and it just works for him. It's fine. Like, it's not a problem for him. But like, there will come a day when he's got a twisted ankle. He's not going to be able to do that. And then he's going to have to sort of break that habit forcibly. I think a lot of young QBs come in and do that. I would say Daniel Jones was an example of a guy that sort of relied on his legs way too much. But I always think of it as the Christian Ponder thing. I always thought Christian Ponder just crutched on his legs, and it worked really well in like 2 games in 2011. And then everyone realized they could just kind of spy him, and it was just over because then he couldn't do anything with his arm. JJ McCarthy wasn't like that. He will scramble, but he'll keep his eyes up and he'll try to throw. So I don't see this happening, but hey, that's why it's a hot take. Last one comes from Red Homer Hankey, who says a Chicago dog only has that absurd combination of toppings to mask that the dog itself is garbage. And if Chicago doesn't like it, I've got a tube steak for them. Okay, man. Aggressive. So, is that a euphemism? Never mind. I feel like this is a restaurant to restaurant issue, because I don't think I'm not familiar enough with like a Chicago hot dog, but I didn't know like the base hot dog of the Chicago hot dog to need to be a specific thing that is bad. Like, it could be an Oscar Mayer wiener, or it can be like a really nice, like all beef Frank, hand rolled or whatever, like, and still be a Chicago dog just by virtue of the toppings. But correct me if I'm wrong. I am not a Chicagoan, and I do feel as though I am stepping out of my lane a little bit here. So I will cut it off there. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.